Welcome to the NGI0 podcast, where we talk to the people who are building the next generation internet.
Hi, I'm Ronny.
And I'm Tessel Renzenbrink. We both work for NLnet, a foundation which financially supports people working on free and open source technologies. Our guest today is Adrian Georgescu. He is the founder and CEO of AG Projects, a company committed to open source telecommunications. For many years, Adrian has worked on Silk Suite, an open source multi-party conference tool. And before Silk, there was Blink. We'll be talking about both these projects today. Hi Adrian, nice to have you here.
Hello Tessel, hello Ronny, thank you for inviting me to this session.
We've devised a list of questions to get to know our guests quickly. They are 3 short questions. So, Firefox or Brave web browser?
This is like voting left or right. The outcome is the same.
You didn't answer yet.
Firefox.
Okay. Vampires or zombies?
This is the type of... I have a third option, none of them.
Okay. Telephone or telegraph?
Blink.
Good. Yeah. So, you work on communication systems. What key issues do you see in this field?
This field has been spawned while internet expanded beyond its original goal, I guess. There was what we call in our niche the VoIP revolution. This happened a while ago when the telecommunications market has been liberalized in Western Europe and beyond. Then internet connections became fast enough to accommodate real-time communications. And that's when internet started to grow beyond the e-commerce and email and messaging systems to what we have today, these video conferencing applications. Initially was voice over IP, the first real-time application that emerged to be ported from the old telecom network to the internet. And this VoIP revolution, I was part of it, and it helped me discover my my own success by riding this wave. So I was early, and I had the luck to have a good mentor, that is Henry Seenreich, which was perceived in the community as the godfather of voice over IP, because he was instrumental in funding the first open source projects related to voice over IP worldwide. And I got to know this part of the industry, the emerging industry, very early on. And I was part of those first creators that made voice over IP work based on internet principles, which are something I would like to mention, because the internet was built based on certain principles. One of them being the end-to-end principle, which means that the network should be kept as simple as possible, and servers should be doing the least amount of work possible, and most of the work and the application should be developed in endpoints. The network being a transparent carrier for whatever the applications in the endpoints are meant or supposed to do. And this end-to-end principle was embedded into the products of mine and other companies who stuck to this principle, as opposed to others who tried to do the opposite, putting a lot of functionality in the network and letting the end user with very little choices and no transparency to what happens in the central part of the internet.
So, and how does Silk contribute to addressing those issues?
Again, the end-to-end principle was such that email is the best example of a software that its principles are today. You can verify that the principles applied doing email are still valid today, because we're still using email after so many years. When voice over IP became an issue, the way to make it interoperable and making a standard so that everyone can implement solutions that talk to each other. The IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, created a working group which eventually led to the creation of this protocol called SIP, which stands for Session Initiation Protocol, which was basically copying from the success of email and HTTP. It was a simple protocol to develop around. It could be reusing the existing email and HTTP models. It was a predictable success. And it is a success. SIP protocol is being embedded into any telecommunication backbone there is in the world. Any cable operator uses SIP protocol at the base, though they don't advertise it as such. The protocol was and still is a success, but less for the end users who don't get the immediate benefits of using SIP because they are being offered services by companies like cable operators, fiber providers, and they're given an address and typically in the form of a phone number. And they're not told that they are using SIP, and they can't even make use of all the features of the SIP protocol because of the business aspect of using this. The companies just replace telephony in place of letting SIP being used for what is originally designed for any type of session, including video, presence, chat, file transfers, any type of real-time communications between end users. Today we see still telephony being as the main application. And our company, since we started, we were dedicated to make SIP a success the way the protocol is envisaged, meaning for applications beyond VoIP. And we're the first company that, being committed to that, we really implemented most, if not all, the specifications from the IETF related to establishing sessions beyond voice over IP, namely chat, messaging, file transfer, conferencing, video calls. And we had this very early on when nobody could even use them because of lack of deployments, lack of bandwidth, lack of everything. However, the software, when IETF proposes ideas and working groups are drafting plans and specifications and standards, it's always usable and useful to have an implementation to prove or disprove the attempted tracks. And we were one of the companies who were instrumental in proving that some ideas were good and others were wrong, being involved close into the standardization and by means of creating software that implemented those specifications very early on while actually developing those specifications. So Silk is actually the second generation of software our company worked on. Initially was Blink, which was a pure SIP client. There was SIP and nothing else. SIP protocol became complicated. Other things were necessary to do things that the protocol alone could not do. So other protocol emerged, like there was an ecosystem around SIP. And things were created around SIP to help SIP achieve the deliverables that were initially aimed for could not be achieved because there was more work required and more parts and other protocols were necessary to complete the picture. And Blink was a pure SIP client doing everything SIP, and then the limitations of the SIP protocol started to appear while more complex applications started to emerge. For instance, this video conference we have right now practically is not possible to do in SIP because SIP has no primitives that can allow you to develop a multi-party conferencing, not in a way that makes sense. So SIP stopped short at the point where video became successful and people started to adopt video calls, especially in video conferencing format. SIP stopped at end-to-end, peer-to-peer, one-to-one calls. And beyond that, standardization didn't help, but rather the opposite. So the end result was that there was no SIP implementation doing video conferencing multi-party anywhere that made any sense at all, technically and otherwise. And the alternative was provided by the web working groups, which were not inside IETF, but other people that leveraged the success of the web, basically completed what SIP was missing, which is WebRTC, which added real-time media to web browsers. And basically it became suddenly easy, not by standards, but by adoption of certain pieces of code to make video conferencing possible in a web browser, which was not possible in a SIP protocol using the tools and the standards available, where it was simply not doable. So Silk came to join together these two worlds, whereby SIP protocol can be used for what it does best, namely addressing in the form of an email address, and using your own domain. You can have an identity, which makes sense, a user at domain, and then connect it to all the media that people may need, namely voice over IP, video, chat, but also the missing part, multi-party video conferencing. How do you do that with a SIP client? Well, you can't. However, as I said, Silk is supposed to be interoperable, and for all the new features, it's using WebRTC. And for compatibility purposes, it's using SIP protocols, so you are always reachable in the best way that the client can support while negotiating a session with anyone that may call you on that address using SIP protocol. And while using the same application like Silk, you can, of course, enjoy features particular to it, namely multi-party conferencing, which is always, locked to your, not vendor, but solution. There is no interoperable multi-party video conferencing solution that I know of. So if you're on Zoom, there is no way to join with another client. There is no way to, because there is no standard. Standards became too complicated, too many people got involved, and it ended up that video party, multi-party conferencing, it's not something standardizable. So we ended up with a plethora of solutions to allow the users to do this, and no standard way of interconnecting between them. Silk is doing the same, as it's not a weakness we could fix. It's inheriting the same model, whereby you can start a video conference inside Silk with other participants, and then if you want to make a regular session one-to-one, you can do it with anyone that supports SIP protocol worldwide, with other solutions that implement SIP protocol. And this is where they are alike or not alike, these solutions. Blink is design-wise, it's an application based on the, you could say, legacy paradigm. Web development changed the way interfaces look like a lot. In the past, you had different operating systems with user interfaces that looked in a certain way. Now you see a sort of standardization whereby all the applications look the same in a webbish way. In Blink, it's a standard legacy type of software whereby we used standard desktop development and standard widget set that is present natively on each computer. So Blink is an interface that looks native on each desktop you use, whether it's Linux or Mac or Windows. Whereas Silk, it's a cross-platform product based on these new principles of the web development. So it looks the same everywhere, but doesn't look native anywhere. So this is the world we live in today.
It's interesting to hear what you're saying is that the telephone companies are selling us telephone connections when actually they are going over SIP already for decades.
100%, yes. Only SIP. They don't advertise it, but it's whenever you make a phone call from your telephone, it's in the server side, it's a SIP server, and your phone is a SIP device. Restricted to do only on audio call.
When I listen to your story, I think you really made WebRTC and SIP work together. They go, hand in hand, so to say. Do you know any? Are you the first? Are there any other applications that do it this well?
With Blink, definitely there was no. We were the best, and still are the. I don't know about any other SIP client that aimed so high and achieved so much, especially with the help of NLnet and other sponsors in the past. The real problem in my field of work meaning if you want to have a business and live from the fruits of your labor, it's very hard because you compete with big companies that offer a free service that does what your software does. But the question comes, how do you live if Google gives you an alternative to make VoIP calls and Apple does the same, and WhatsApp and all these companies that have thousands of developers and gives you something for free? I'm not even sure why is there an expectation that any small company can be successful of doing the same with a few people in terms of revenues or success as a business. I don't know how. We wouldn't be successful had we just tried to monetize this SIP clients or Silk clients, because you compete with big names that offer a similar product which is properly maintained over years. They have a lot of engineering support for it, so it's a lost battle in the sense of trying to make money with something which is free. However, knowing this, again, my company was able to position itself in a way that was able to maintain over time, competing in this sense with large companies that have infinite resources between codes for these end user applications, while having revenue from a different source. Same as us, our company, AG Projects, our source of revenue is maintenance that we do for telecom operators. We also develop the server side for all these things that, in the case of SIP, you have a client, but there is a server as well. And these servers is a product that companies are ready to pay for, and they have a budget for it, and they have a maintenance budget for it. And this is how our company was able to survive over time in order to build this for the end user free SIP clients like Blink and Silk. Again, the development effort is huge because it's very complicated. Most of the internet is involved when you build such a client. There are so many subparts and moving parts under the hood that you really have to be very knowledgeable and need to have people with the right experience to make it work, as opposed to a simple application doing one little task. If you look in under the hood of a complex application that does real-time communication, it's complex. So these people are hard to find, and of course not cheap to build in the end such a software. We could do it because we had alternative sources of income, and even so, with those was not enough, meaning that the effort is so high that without the help of NLnet and others alike, it was not possible to maintain and develop further a software that even after 14 years still works properly, and it's up to date and still downloaded and used and validated by anyone who tries to use it, has only good things to say about it. So this is a long-term effort that we're able, with the help of NLnet in principle, because they were the main sponsors over the years, and then my company during the idle financing was carrying forward and continuing to maintain things over time, so that things keep working, and it's not just a dead project in a trench somewhere like many projects end up. After a short period of funding, they just disappear and they just vanish because of lack of adoption or lack of support or lack of passion of somebody who maintains them. We did this long-term support, and I'm proud of this personally. When I traveled back to my first office, it was last week, I found an old laptop, Dell Inspiron laptop running Windows, somewhere in a drawer. I picked it up and I tried to use it. It was from 2011. Still worked. I started it, but I could not do anything with it. I could not read my emails, could not browse the internet. Everything was incompatible. But I started Blink and I called my mother, and it still worked. So this tells you something about the tools that IETF standardized and the way we do things, that they are, not timeless, but resist long time. And this is one of the things that I'm very proud of, that after so many years, it still serves its purpose.
I think this also taps into another question that I would have is, and this is not only related to the VoIP world, but also to email. How is it possible to be a sustainable software company with open source software in this world of big tech. Like you said, there are those big tech companies. They have a whole lot of developers. They have a lot of money, and it's up to you with less developers, less money to draw the competition. So how do you make it sustainable? Is that only by other revenue sources? Is that by is it only possible with grants?
Well, in my case, the grants were not enough, and my company income dedicated for this part was also not enough. So somehow, in my case, I can definitely say that without both, I could not have, for instance, just with NLnet, I would not have been able to pull it off. It's just too much cost, and there are unforeseen, R&D is such that it's hard to predict the outcome, and you have to explore things that may have never been done before, and then you don't know how long it takes. So you may make a plan, but you just run into unknown, and then if you don't have resources, you basically lose all the investment at that point. So it's very hard with just one source of income. Is definitely a big risk. With two is better. The more you have, we had even a third source of income. We put one of the apps in the Mac App Store, where we ask money for it, though there was a free version available for those who bothered to download the software from dangerous places like a website. This is something that it's so strange. People, prefer to download it from the Apple Store because it's more safe and pay for it because they think it's better, but it's the same software. That helped, but not much as well. So the sales revenues were never large enough to matter in the great scheme of things, were too minimal to matter, but still everything adds up. So in the end, because there is this persistent usage and the number of downloads is constant or growing, or people buy it, or you see that there is constant demand for it. So when you see that, and if you spend time doing it, you'll maintain it because it's your baby, so you don't want to see it dead. But that's, of course, because also I like what I do. A lot of people just follow the funding available without caring much about the outcome. And, of course, this matters. If you like what you do, and if you really would do it even without that funding, for instance, it's different if it's a hobby or it's... So it depends on the person and the developer whether they can complement all these restrictions that appear.
What general advice would you have for other open source companies to build a sustainable model?
Well, that's like claiming I know what I'm doing. Business-wise, I never had any clues. So I just follow my instincts. I don't have business plans, loans, and my company was always cash flow positive, and nobody taught me how to do it. So I don't know how to give advice to other people because I have no plan. I just use my instincts. My instincts seems to be working, and then that's very hard to answer question.
Well, yeah. Well, that's also honest. I mean, maybe your instincts are good.
Well, they are, as it turns out. But do I understand correctly that the fact that Silk is still alive is basically because you are so dedicated to it that you will just continue to keep it alive? I mean,
yes.
From a business.
Yes, as long as I can, I will. However, a little observation. This is actually Blink you should ask about because that's the old one, let's say, the first one, which is the pure SIP client. Silk is very fresh, new, and up to date with everything, mobile and everything. So far from being over with it, it's like at the beginning of its still in its infancy in terms of usage and growth and adoption. So the real issue is Blink, because some people may say that it's an obsolete piece of software, which I totally disagree with, just because, it's like the cars today, they all suck. You want a nice looking car that feels like a car, you look for an older car that had that was a car. Today, the principles of building cars have changed to the point of building an iPad and putting wheels around it. But that's not a car. That's something else. Same with everything. Beauty matters, and classic things properly done never die. So we think Blink is the same, and we try to maintain it very pure in sense of coding and the libraries and everything we use. It's still a piece of software that made sense in 2009 and makes sense today if you start inspecting the code. So the code is written in such a way that is timeless, and as long as the support for the operating systems do not vanish, meaning in the end is based upon a programming language that of course may become obsolete over time. There's nothing you can do about that one, for instance. But still, the building blocks are pretty well alive and kicking, so there is no way that there is any obstacle in the near term in the sense of survivability. And then the features matter. You try to be on par with the big boys, which you can't because simply lack of funding and engineers and so forth. However, things got so good that in the end, a lot of features built nowadays are just not necessary, and some companies just innovate for the sake of doing something, though they shouldn't. So in this sense, we don't have this problem. When we reach a level of maturity that we like, then we just keep it working without aiming to change it unnecessarily. So we reached a level of maturity that requires conservation and incremental updates rather than completely retweaking, changing everything. So we're very happy because it's comfortable to maintain something that makes sense, is beautiful, works fine. You just add a few things. It's a pleasureful work. And this is Blink. So it's a legacy piece of software that we keep it up to date in perfect shape. And thanks to NLnet, we can bring it back to Windows because of lack of resources and lack of developers that over time we lost. There was a Windows version, but at some point there was not anymore because we just couldn't do it. We didn't have the people and the time to maintain that part, that version. And we will be able to do this fall to bring Blink back to Windows because now it's available for Mac and Linux only. And with the help of NLnet, we will be able to make it cross-platform truly again like it originally was for all three major desktop platforms. And again, it's hard to know how to monetize this, especially on Windows. I don't know if it's possible. And the goal also of NLnet is to allow for the software to be distributed purely in open source form. And it's a condition of funding, so I don't aim or plan to monetize necessarily Blink for Windows. So I don't know where it goes with this monetization of open source. It's a difficult story. Again, our story works because we have server-side software that we monetize, which indirectly funds the client side. And the client side helps as a marketing tool. If this could be an advice, whenever you give something for free, you can in my company, making free software that you publish, it's like doing a marketing activity. People know you're knowledgeable in that area, so it's like a business card that people know. And then when they need a solution for the server side, they don't say, but Adrian, what do you know to do in this area? They all know that I know because our software stands proof for the claims.
How about the community behind Silk? Is it only you as your company working on it? Is there an active community behind it?
Right. There is a community, but I wouldn't say developers. I mean, the contributions can be seen on GitHub. We publish the software and all the patches, the authors that contributed over time. But the external contributions are minimum to level of patches and small changes. The heavy lifting still belong to our company and the developers dedicated full time for it because, as I said, it's a complex task, takes time, and you need the proper individuals to even attempt to make a change to a software that is very complex. So in reality, it's only our company developing it, and people using it may find, little improvements, helping with translations and things that are marginal in terms of there are no new functions added. Very seldom happened, or almost none, that people added a feature, but they did provided fixes and things that we embedded back into the software with corrections and things that were discovered by end users. So the community really, to answer your question, the community in our case would be the SIP community, and server side, which is related to OpenSIP's project, which is the server side of things. In order to make a SIP client or also a WebRTC client, you need the correspondent server part. And without having that properly, properly in place, you will fail to build a client, because it's not just reading a spec and writing some software. You need a working server that would answer to all the requests your application is sending. And without having the server side ready and properly working, you cannot attempt to build a client. And actually, this is the reason why our client works, because before even attempting to build a client, we had the server working properly. So everything we build in the client, we could test accordingly and correct and fix, whereas without having the counterpart, the server side, you cannot do it, because it's impossible to just do it blindly with no actual proof it works. You need a server. In our case, this community of OpenSIPs goes back to the first open source project related to voice over IP. It was a project spawned by Fraunhofer Institute in Berlin. It was called SIP Express Router at the origin. And Fraunhofer Institute had a director at the time who was looking for new ideas. That's back in time when telecom was being contemplating being moved over the internet, and there was no standards. And there were standards, but there were no implementations, actually. Not in the open source domain. There were companies implementing standards, but those were the old telecom companies like Ericsson, Siemens, Alcatel. Nothing in the open source domain. And Fraunhofer Institute allocated budget for developing the first SIP server in open source model. The director was a person of Romanian origins. And then he contacted his old friends in Bucharest, and for this reason alone, this project ended up full of Romanians. That's why I was also sort of around there, perhaps. So Henry Sinreich, the mentor of this SIP Express router project, he helped guided the Fraunhofer ideas where to actually direct their development and R&D. So Henry was basically giving the clues. Then Fraunhofer spawned this software called SIP Express Router, which then there were spin-offs, commercial ones, that took this software and made implementations in the market with it. Several companies did it. It became a success. And it became the reference implementation of any operator that has SIP. Maybe they don't like to show it, but I'm sure the developers and the people supporting can tell you, of course, we still run SIP Express Router or a variant of it, though they don't want to say too much about it. So the project emerged to be a success, and this success helped also indirectly Blink, because this community was present in many places, at conferences, exhibitions, and this ecosystem helped SIP protocol became, successful as well. And implicitly, Blink and other software we created over time was present there, and people knew us, and then the community helped that all the companies present in this ecosystem benefited, including mine. So there was a complementary function in this ecosystem rather than competition. So Blink has no competition. I don't know of any SIP client that can attempt to claim they have the same feature set. There are SIP clients, but typically VoIP only. Or maybe they add another feature, but ours has all the features from the IETF working group. So it's the only one that has or claims to have the IETF working group stamp on, we did everything they standardized. with SIP in the client.
What, besides working on the Windows client, what are the next steps for your project?
Well, right now in the past couple of months, we to attempt to actually do a Windows client, we had to bring the software up to date with the latest things that are today. The dependencies on every computer over time, they get modernized and you get to another version, namely Qt framework, which is the building block for Blink Qt, which is the Linux and Windows version of Blink. This changed a lot, so we had to basically redo a lot of the GUI elements. We had to basically port all the code that was originally written on Qt. I don't know when we started, it was Qt2. Now we're at Qt6, and there's a lot of work and heavy lifting to keep up with these changes. So that was eating a lot of effort, and we spent 3 months doing this. And now the software, just this week, we plan to make the first release still on Linux, but with all the code ported so it's compatible with Qt6. And then aim to have the building for Windows becomes possible, because otherwise it wouldn't be. We could not just take the old code and make a build for Windows. So plans after we do this, we're not there yet, so we still work, and we are still aiming for doing the Windows release. So this is the immediate things we're involved with, and I don't aim to dare where to go after that, because I have my hands full already with this. So first step is to do the last release of Qt5 version, which is still available on most Linux systems. But this year, all new Linux versions will have Qt6, the default. So then immediately after we wrap with the old Qt5 legacy, we make almost ready to go release for Qt6, which Qt6 itself is not really ready to be released properly. It lacks skins for different operating systems. You have less flexibility in terms of, how do you say, it's a new thing, but it's a future-proof thing, or, well, as future-proof as you can make things for the next couple of years. So Qt6 is not really ready to be production ready, but probably end of the year, next year, it will be the de facto user interface widget block there is. So our software aims to be ready for it while we do this iteration. So when we do the Windows build, we will also have the Linux and the first incarnation of Mac based on this tool set, because Blink had a different Mac source code written differently, and with Qt now you can be really cross-platform for all three operating systems. So you have the same code base on Linux, Mac, and Windows. Whereas in the past you had Linux and Windows with the Blink Qt version, or Qt, and Mac had another version, and still has it, which I'm afraid it will reach end of the line because of the conditions imposed by Apple. This is one of the things we are also battling with these ecosystems controlled by these large companies. They force you to make choices or to give up on choices based on their own interest, and suddenly you hit the wall. Your software is not allowed in the App Store anymore because you cannot be compliant because of reasons outside of your control. And I suspect the same will happen to Blink Cocoa version. At some point, Apple Store will simply not allow it because the lack of support for Python language and the fact that the developers don't want to use it anymore on Mac, the Apple developers meaning, they force you to basically dump your software because you can't fix the whole Apple libraries, which are closed source that don't support various things anymore. And suddenly you update your computer and your software is dead. And there is no documentation at all. And if you discover what the problem is, you have no support from Apple about it. They don't care. And they force you to migrate in a different direction. Whereas the Qt seems to be going into the right direction. They have proper support on all platforms. So in the end, probably Blink will be one version on all three operating systems. Now we still have two of them, as I said. There is a Cocoa version and Blink Cocoa, we called it the native macOS incarnation of Blink. And the Linux and Windows version based on a different widget set, the Qt framework.
Any considerations for iOS or Android clients, or is that world already full of SIP clients?
Well, we did it. Silk is a SIP client for both. Silk as a client works on Apple and Android phones alike. So Silk is not just a desktop solution, but a mobile as well. And this is again where we stopped with Blink in the sense of mobile developments, because it was a no-go because of the choice of the the programming language, namely Python. Python is not supported on mobiles. There is no Python anything on mobiles. So basically it's it was not possible after starting the original desktop version to move towards mobile with the same software, because it's impossible. And this is where again Silk took a different approach and used the tools and the programming languages that were properly supported in both sides, meaning Android and Apple. There is a React framework that is able to help developers to build once for both. So using this, I built the Silk Android version, the Silk iOS version, and they still work fine. They are okay with their feature set, which is less limited than, a WhatsApp, but again, it's with the amount of people and funding, we did pretty well so far. It's an application that works, and you can have features like replicated messages across multiple devices, both desktop and mobile, encryption end-to-end. A lot of good features that are hard to find in a similar project. And video conferencing from mobile and desktop, with the limitations they are in the software, we're not perfect, but it's a perfectly workable solution for small groups. And you have the source code for everything, and it's no surprise there. It's easy to inspect it, audit it, and you know what it does, as opposed to using other solutions that are black boxes and you don't know what happens to your data.
Interesting, and a recommendation, I think, for small groups to move to a private and safe platform.
Right.
Yeah, which is probably a good bridge to a more general question, because you have shown multiple ways in which there's actually a really beautiful standard and beautiful implementations, but the surrounding stuff of people wanting to commercialize it or own it or make it proprietary software, make it actually take the good stuff and make it worse. Do you have any hopes? Do you see any ways that this is gonna take a different turn now? That either users or big tech are.
I'm not sure. I'm a bit pessimistic, because one of the issues we see is that a few players can decide overnight to change direction in ways that you cannot do from your level. So we're all using these similar platforms that have similar interests. These cloud providers, namely Google, Apple, all these people that we rely on them for our computers to run at all nowadays. They force upon us various changes that at the developer level you cannot change them. You have to go 1-2 levels up, where policies are being made and carefully analyzed to see if it makes sense or not to do things that are being imposed on many of us. One of the issues that I consider harmful is the misuse of secure identities today. We all claim we want that, and there was a need for encryption, but after all is said and done, we end up with the outcome is that for the end user, suddenly it has, is being just tracked all over the place. And while encryption is a good thing, a lot of things shouldn't even be encrypted. If I want to broadcast news, I don't need to have an encrypted session to, a newspaper where they just share the same information. And by imposing these TLS certificates everywhere, it becomes a nuisance to surf the web. all these certificates introduce a level of, they say, security, but in the end, for the end user, ends up not being able to surf websites which are too old, they don't have the right certificate, and all these pop-ups that show up on your computer with things that nobody understands. I have to, it's just, they're meant to scare you, so you just always go for to their choice, to do their stuff, accept their conditions. And the people are slave to this technology that is being controlled by a few large players. And in this sense, I don't know how people at my level can change it. We did make the internet run, but now once it runs, it's being taken over and hijacked by interests that are very high. And I don't know if we have the stamina to go there and fight, because it's a pretty big battle, and at my level I can't fight it because of lack of resources.
But maybe to add a little glimpse of hope in there, I do get the impression that people are getting more aware of the problems that it brings, and people in general, and also governments, and that there is already for a while people are pushing back.
There is, of course, people look for alternatives as far as they can, and they do look and they do find alternatives, and we are such an alternative when it comes to real-time communications, but it's still confined to the developer type of persons, people which are aware, because we market it around SIP, but nobody knows about SIP. People use a phone, they don't even know about technical things. Then if you try to make it something that is user-friendly, between quotes, suddenly it gets lost into the amalgam of other similar solution with small descriptions that nobody knows what they do and how. For that, then again, you make a client which doesn't, in the end, looks the same like others, at least when you download it or looking at the description. You can't tell what's the difference, and then they have better marketing, so you're lost there. In trying to be normal, let's say, you get lost. Trying to become an expert in a certain area works, but then your audience is confined to the experts in your ecosystem, or I don't know, people who are very tech savvy, and they say, yes, I want to have a SIP client where I understand my data, how it works. But then again, the other people you are calling, they don't care about this. They have WhatsApp, and they don't want to change that, even with Telegram or other things. They just have WhatsApp, and for them it's the end. It's too complex already. So I don't know how to hurt people in a certain direction when it comes to open source or open standards. It all makes sense, but the adoption is forced by the default app installed on your phone when you buy it. So that's hard to fight, right? If you have a pre-installed application on a device you buy and 1 billion people buy the same, then which application do you think people will use? Mine? No. So in this sense, I don't know. It's an uphill battle, which is hard to win, unless a third party comes with a different ecosystem, different mobile phone, different choices for software. But now you have none. You have Apple ecosystem and Google Android, and there is no other mobile phone provider even, or operating system that is worthwhile noticing out there. So how can you change this? I can't change this. You can change it maybe. How would you do it?
Well, again, to try to keep a bit of a glimpse of hope here, one thing I find very important is the worst thing in the world is if you see a horrible problem and there is just, you see no solution to it whatsoever, no road to walk, no perspective that you can take.
There are. And I don't want to take the optimism out of it.
But that's where I'm going. It's like people like you who are building this stuff, even indeed when it's really hard to get it out there because of this unequal playing field.
That's the right
for
term.
Me, what gives me hope is the fact that at least it's there. You know, if somebody comes to the realization this is no longer what I want, then there's your projects, but
right.
but there's a whole host of stuff out there that they can go to.
It is good, as you mentioned. It is. It's good to be optimistic. Don't take my pessimism. I'm looking specifically at my capabilities and my limitations. So I know how much I can do. And then, of course, knowing how far you might want to go, but you can't. You feel a bit frustrated, but of course, it's just a personal feeling. It shouldn't be contagious.
Well, I, for my part, think that you are doing an awful lot actually to contribute to making this better, this problem, to addressing these issues. So maybe from your perspective, it's a bit negative, but from my perspective, you are doing an awful lot. So thank you for that.
Yeah, well, it's a compliment. Thank you very much.
And maybe from that note, if the people who are listening to this podcast, if you what could they do to bring Blink and Silk further?
Well, I think that the software stands for itself, and if you want to communicate over, let's say, you want something that works over time, look at email. You can have the same address for email as for SIP. And because it's based on a standard, you probably will still use it in 20 years. And I think this is, an advantage that many have missed or nobody has emphasized enough. So, but then again, it's what do you do if your phone number becomes your identifier? You start WhatsApp and it's your phone number. Where is your address? And then you're stuck with that, and you can't even move your WhatsApp to another phone without great pain, and you're stuck in that ecosystem. With SIP, you have the flexibility to have many devices, and you have this feature called parallel forking, which is, SIP invented it, the fact that you can get called and accept the call in different places at any moment. This was a SIP invention, this parallel forking feature, which disappeared later, much later, in WhatsApp and Telegram and other apps. But before, you could not even do this. SIP protocol was the one that made it actually deployed it the first time. And they copied from it, and there are a lot of things that SIP did right and other did wrong, like with the video conferencing. So it's good to have alternatives, and then the problem is that all these alternatives had a short lifespan. And ours, we hope, it still has energy to go forward, and it did so far for many years. And this is something that is important. Whatever, I don't want to change my company programming language every 6 months. It's terrible. Same for communications. I don't want to look for another set of tools every. And SIP is portable in the sense, if you have Blink, again, is not the only one. You can put your address into another client. This alone gives you some sort of, as an end user, it gives you the freedom to use another software if you want, and you're not obliged to use. You have the coupling between the address and the client is same like your email address. Yeah, you can put it in any email client on Windows or on your mobile. It still works, right? This philosophy doesn't exist outside our ecosystem. What do you mean you take your address, put it in another vendor SIP client, and then you can call again with the same things? This is only SIP possible, and because of this ecosystem made it possible. The rest don't let you do that. If you have your WhatsApp identity, you're not going to run away with that anywhere else. They force you to just, all your contact list is stuck there. And of course, there are ways to import, export, but there is no way to call a WhatsApp user from a SIP account. So they all close their islands and they have their user base. And it is actually the only way to cross these borders is by using SIP protocol. In reality, anywhere there is any kind of interconnection between whatever islands, closed islands of, they may even use SIP internally or not, doesn't matter. The border is always SIP to get an audio call or a video call carried across. So again, SIP is omnipresent, a good choice, and is being adopted quite a lot, but it's not advertised as such. So SIP, it is a winner in this battlefield, but it's an invisible player. Nobody knows about it, but it is there as a building block, as a client, as a server, as an interconnect path between two islands of different solutions that need to interoperate with each other. So in this sense, SIP did win the battle, but it was not deployed as such inside WhatsApp. Actually, Apple themselves used SIP. I don't know today anymore, but they had a SIP client. They had FaceTime running SIP. When the program crashed, you got a SIP dump out of it. They didn't say they used SIP until people saw the software crashing. But you see, SIP, it is adopted, but then it's obfuscated by whomever is using it, tries to cover and hide it. So in this sense, SIP is the winner. People try to say that we don't use it, but we do.
Well, thank you very much for unhiding SIP and showing it to us and giving it shining a little bit of light on it, because it obviously deserves that. Ronny, do you have any more questions?
Well, I think not technically, because this was this how would I say it, a masterclass in SIP maybe. Yeah, very interesting. You also said that multiple times that you were helped by the NGI funding, and that you could not do your work without the NGI funding. So, yeah, we had a question there, but you answered that one already. But maybe what advice would you have for other people who are considering applying for NGI funding?
Well, advice, I don't have advice, but the reality is that a lot of funding is lost because, no follow-up, but whose fault is it? I mean, you may have a good idea, but how to monetize it and how to survive after initial implementation, it's a problem for everyone. Advice. I remember starting my business. I was in Amsterdam with the KVK, the Chamber of Commerce, and there was this seminar about startups, and there was this lady presenting and said, like, you are all starting entrepreneurs, and there are like probably 100 of us there. Do you know how many of you will still be doing what you came here for, and your business, and over 1 year time? How many of you will be still here? Well, no, it was 3 years time, and everyone said like, well, maybe 50%. In the end, the lady said, only 3 of you will still be doing what you aimed to do, that you are here today. 3 out of 100. And everyone booed and everything, said, no way, our ideas are the best and we'll be successful. And you need that to start. But then the reality is that a lot of things just don't have a future. They start, but they don't go too far. And then advice. How can you give advice in this direction? It's a roller coaster. You have to observe you have, first of all, to not just do things in a vacuum. You have to find an ecosystem where, you're not alone. And to be observed means there are others like you. So you cannot just be alone with the best solution in a place where nobody else is, because you'll not get noticed. Whatever you do, try to find a place where you have more people like you, and go there and try to see if there is a place for what your idea is trying to achieve. So don't be alone. Go find your community, find the people that are related to your field, and try to get in there early. And especially if it's a growing trend, it's good to be there early. And then even if you're late, it's still not bad. But try to find a community where your solution fits, and try to start from there. And because funding alone will not solve your problems long term.
Yeah, well, thank you.
It's good advice.
Okay, well, from our side, I'd like to say thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you for inviting me to this session.